Hi, my name's Dr. Laura Shobiye, and I'm going to talk to you about my project where I applied decolonial and anti-racist methods. The question marks in the title here are because the way I approached my methods is not necessarily the best way. It's definitely not the only way. It is a way where I took my inspiration from decolonial and anti-racist methods, and it may give you some ideas for how you can go about this. So how was I informed by decolonial theories? Well, really, a lot of this for me was about power dynamics, not wanting to replicate those colonialistic power dynamics of extraction, exploitation, and transactional relationships, which for me would be very much aligned with colonialism, racial capitalism, using people's labour largely and time for my benefit. So I wanted something more reciprocal, and an approach and outputs that would be more representative of the participants and communities that I was working with, and not just meeting academic demands and requirements. So very much working with people, not doing research to them or for them. So I was inspired with my approach to being decolonial and anti-racist by arts-based methods. I was working with asylum seekers and refugees and recognised that not all communication is verbal or involves words. The arts-based methods can be really useful when it comes to discussing sensitive and traumatic topics. And I would be working with people for whom English may not be their first language, and they may not be confident with it. So an arts-based methods, and I use creative visual, really images, was a way for me to have an additional form of communication and to aid the process of communication. I chose images because they are relatively universally recognised as a form of communication, be that mark making, paintings, sculptures, although the styles may not be universal. It would be something easy to explain to my participants. And I would also be able to maintain the dynamic of a one-to-one relationship with each participant, which was really important for me to maintain, to ensure that I kept that reciprocal, non-exploitative relationship that was also trauma-informed. So how did I apply those theoretical approaches to my actual methods? Well, as I said, I went for creative and visual with images, initially asking women to create drawings during a first and then a second interview with them. And then in the third phase of data generation and making, not collection, they sent me photos, which I then edited. I applied auteur theory, which meant that the women did explain each of the images to me so that I could ensure that what they said, what they wanted them to represent, took precedence over my interpretation. I worked with some women to create digital stories and visual storyboards. The example here is a storyboard of one woman, Sarah, her pseudonym, her visual narrative. These types of outputs were ones that could complement and support the academic requirements of me, but while also representing the participants and making the whole process a bit more collaborative and participatory, that generating and making of data rather than extracting, collecting, or having participants who were passive while I observed them. These types of outputs are in my thesis and in other academic outputs such as book chapters and journal articles, and I use them for more engagement forms of dissemination, presentations, training, updates, and it ensures that I am communicating my research and the findings with the communities that I worked with in ways that are meaningful to them and not just meaningful to researchers and academics. So part of this approach, as I said, was to not want to be extractive or exploitative. So I worked really hard to practice reciprocity on an ongoing basis, To do that just at the moment at which I meet them, or in a transaction where I pay someone for their time, to me would perhaps still be exploitative, where the benefit is mainly mine. So I avoided stalking, tried not to spend time and go back to participants that didn't want that. But those that do, I have an ongoing relationship. And during my field work, I provided craft materials, little colouring books to children. I've provided updates to participants and communities in the formats that I've talked about. And I continue working with the communities. I teach asylum seekers and refugees and help them into higher education. And I'm specifically working with asylum seekers to put recommendations from my research into practice. Another example of reciprocity for me is that I've recently had a book published, and I am with a chapter in it that I wrote that features 3 women's narratives, and I'm sending a copy of that book to each of those 3 women. It's another sort of checkpoint moment of reciprocity. For anyone who wants to learn a little bit more, there's a long list of references there, but I hope that this gives you a little bit of a taste of one way of approaching decolonial and anti-racist research methods.